Hi everyone, my name is Apuraj Garikapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Abhai. Accusation himself. The nobles watched and discussed as the man who preached bloodline purity exposed himself as a complete hypocrite. Julius still wanted to step in and spare Evelyn from reliving her trauma, but Theo quietly stopped him. This wasn't Julius's battle anymore. This was Evelyn's chance to finally defeat the monster who had haunted her entire life. The moment the referee's whistle echoed through the arena, Evelyn wasted no time and immediately went on the offensive. With both her left arm missing and Wolfgang fighting with the arm Julius had broken earlier, the duel started on relatively even footing. The difference was that Evelyn had already spent years adapting to her handicap while Wolfgang was struggling to fight under the same conditions. She quickly seized control of the pace, forcing the Elder Dragon onto the defensive with a relentless barrage of precise attacks. Then, at the perfect moment, she revealed her trump card. Her stance suddenly shifted and even Julius immediately sensed the change. Evelyn unleashed the legendary Wind Thunder God technique, Dogheart, a sword art long believed to be lost. Without relying on mana, she generated a storm purely through technique. Moving like the calm eye of a raging cyclone, her blade effortlessly deflected Wolfgang's attacks while continuously forcing him backward. The older spectators were stunned. They instantly recognized traces of the legendary Sword of the Wind Storm, but couldn't understand how Evelyn had mastered such a forgotten art. Watching from the sidelines, Theo couldn't help but smile. This was exactly why he'd insisted on a mana-free duel trial. Without magical power deciding everything, true swordsmanship could finally shine. More importantly, Wolfgang's greatest advantage, his pure blood lineage and overwhelming mana, had been completely stripped away. Without those crutches, Theo knew the so-called Elder Dragon wasn't nearly as impressive as his reputation suggested. Even so, Wolfgang wasn't completely helpless. After decades, as one of Ragnar's strongest warriors, he still possessed incredible physical strength. Refusing to stay cornered, he forcefully broke through Evelyn's offense with sheer brute power, swinging his sword like a wild beast, and finally creating enough space to counterattack. Regaining some confidence, the old man couldn't resist running his mouth. He arrogantly promised that he beat Evelyn until she cried, begged for mercy, and remembered her place. Those words would have shattered the old Evelyn, but not the woman standing before him now. She had long since stopped seeing Wolfgang as the center of her world. Julius had believed in her when no one else did. The white armor dragon cavalry had become her real family. Theo had given her the chance to reclaim the future that had been stolen from her. Surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her, the fear that once controlled her life had finally disappeared. If Wolfgang wanted a contest of strength, then she would gladly beat him at his own game. Every strike she threw carried years of pain, resentment, and determination. The little girl who used to tremble before her abusive father was gone. In her place stood Captain Evelyn Nerval, a warrior determined to cut down the monster who had ruined her childhood. Watching her fight back without fear moved even the nobles in the audience, who realized they weren't just witnessing a duel. They were watching someone finally break free from decades of abuse. The battle reached its climax when Evelyn found the opening she had been waiting for. Without a moment's hesitation, she delivered one decisive slash that cleanly severed Wolfgang's arm. Silence briefly fell over the arena before the crowd erupted into cheers. The referee immediately declared the duel over and announced Evelyn as the winner of the final round, officially giving Julius' side victory in the duel trial. At that moment, reality finally hit her. According to Ragnar law, she had been declared not guilty. The burden she had carried since childhood seemed to disappear all at once. As she walked back toward Theo and Julius, she felt lighter than she had in years. She thanked both of them from the bottom of her heart. Julius had saved her when she was nothing but an abandoned child. Even after she lost her arm, he never stopped believing she could make a comeback. Then Theo completely changed the direction of her life by restoring her confidence, helping her return to the battlefield and giving her a reason to move forward again. Thanks to them, she had finally defeated not only Wolfgang, but also the fear that had haunted her for her entire life. Meanwhile, Wolfgang couldn't accept his humiliating defeat. His subordinates rushed over to help him and retrieve his sword, but the moment he saw his own reflection staring back from the blade, his rage completely consumed him. Throwing his men aside, He grabbed his sword and charged straight toward Evelyn, screaming her name with pure hatred while trying to kill her, despite the duel already being over. Before he could even get close, Julius instantly stepped in. The demon dragon grabbed Wolfgang with his only remaining good arm and effortlessly forced him back down, reminding him that he had gotten off lightly with only one arm gone. If he wanted to keep acting like a fool, Julius would gladly remove the other one and leave him looking like a mannequin. The tension inside the arena skyrocketed, as everyone feared another bloody clash was about to erupt. Just as the situation reached its breaking point, an urgent interruption suddenly echoed across the battlefield, stopping everyone where they stood. Just when it looked like everything was finally over, a messenger burst into the arena with urgent news. The Troyevan family had officially launched their invasion, and every soldier was ordered back to their posts immediately. Julius clicked his tongue in frustration. The timing couldn't have been worse. He still wanted to settle things with Wolfgang properly, but the battlefield came first. Swallowing his anger, he turned away and ordered his trusted officers to prepare for war. The white armor dragon cavalry would be leading the charge on the front lines. Meanwhile, Wolfgang was still too blinded by pride to read the room. He kept shouting that the duel trial wasn't over, but nobody paid him any attention anymore. Even Theo Ragnar had enough. The ice dragon warned him that if he ever disgraced the 9 dragons again, she'd personally turn him into an ice-covered pinction. Wolfgang desperately tried hiding behind his status, claiming that touching him would insult the entire Elder Council. Neil simply told him to look behind him. Every elder had already turned their backs on him. None of them wanted to be associated with someone who had disgraced Ragnar by violating the sacred rules of the duel trial and attacking after losing. In a single night, Wolfgang lost far more than an arm. He lost his authority, his council, and whatever respect the Ragnar clan still had for him. Watching the once proud elder reduced to such a pathetic state gave Julius a sense of justice. For now, seeing the old tyrant lose everything was punishment enough. While Ragnar's leaders dealt with the political fallout, Ed Trovan was already putting the next phase of his plan into motion. His forces had successfully occupied the central plateau and were steadily advancing toward Castle Harmon. Reports confirmed that Ragnar's main forces, including the Lord's cavalry and the private armies of the Six Pillars, were gathering at the plateau to stop the invasion. Exactly as Ed expected, he couldn't help laughing to himself. The clan's strongest warriors were focusing all their attention on the obvious battlefield, while completely overlooking his true objective. To everyone else, the battle at the central plateau looked like the main event. To Ed, it was nothing more than a distraction. While Ragnar concentrated its strength there, he intended to quietly seize the real prize hidden elsewhere. Every chess piece had moved exactly where he wanted it, and his plan to take control was finally beginning to unfold. Far away and back as territory, things looked strangely peaceful on the surface. Ever since the collapse of the Sarah's Guild, one of Ragnar's 6-pillar families had completely fallen apart. The guards stationed on the walls couldn't help gossiping about their new family head, Navin Bacchus. Since inheriting leadership, Navin had done nothing except lock himself inside and drink himself senseless every single day. With war approaching, many questioned whether he deserved to lead the family at all. Older guards, however, understood the reality better. The Bacchus family had lost almost everything. Their treasury was buried under debt, their knights and long-time vassals had abandoned them, and most of the household had already been imprisoned. At this point, drowning his sorrows in alcohol was probably the only freedom Navin had left. To make matters even worse, Ragnar had supposedly sent reinforcements to strengthen the territory, but those soldiers looked just as hopeless, leading them with Civil Drea alongside Iod Neuron and several of Theo's biggest fanboys. Officially, they were there to reinforce the defenses. In reality, they spent every night passed out drunk in the streets. Even during watch duty, they could barely stay awake. To the local guards, it felt less like support and more like Ragnar politely telling the ruined Bacchus family they were no longer worth caring about. What nobody realized was that one of the guards listening to those conversations wasn't loyal at all, secretly working for the enemy. He slipped out of the territory after sunset and reported everything he had learned. Morale inside Bacchus territory had completely collapsed, making the upcoming operation almost guaranteed to succeed. As soon as the report ended, several hooded figures stepped out from the shadows. They had heard enough, it was time to move. Confident that the weakened territory wouldn't put up much resistance, the group quietly advanced toward the Bacchus estate under the cover of darkness. Just as expected, Captain Sybil, who was supposed to be guarding the walls, was lying there completely passed out, with a bottle still in his hand. One of the assassins silently climbed onto the wall. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Pi grow naturally. Looked down at the sleeping captain with disgust, and cursed the useless drunk under his breath. Then, with flawless precision, he raised his dagger and drove it straight toward Sybil's head. Back at the White Armored Dragon Cavalry headquarters, Julius was caught completely off guard when Theo made an outrageous request. The young lord wanted permission to invoke independent operation rights, despite only being an intermediate inspector. Julius shut the idea down almost instantly. The clan was officially at war. Every soldier was needed on the front lines, and military operations took priority over everything else. There was no way he could make an exception, even for a successor candidate. Theo, however, calmly explained that his request was directly tied to the war effort and presented a stack of classified documents to back up his claims. The moment Julius skimmed through them, his expression completely changed. Theo revealed that the Trovan clan's attacks on Castle Harmon and the Central Highlands were nothing more than massive diversions. According to all the evidence he had gathered, the true objective of the invasion was the floating archipelago and the weakened Bacchus territory. Using reports collected over the past several weeks, Theo connected the dots. The Black Skull organization had already proven during the Sarah's hostage incident that they were secretly working with the Trovans. On top of that, Black Skull originally came from the floating archipelago, which used to control the Empire's maritime trade and gold flow. That explained where the Trovans had obtained the absurd amount of money needed to fund such a large-scale war. If they secured the archipelago, Ragnar would eventually face an enemy with limitless resources sitting right on its doorstep. Theo argued that reinforcing back his territory should become an immediate priority before the enemy seized it. Julius understood the logic immediately, but there was still one huge problem. Nearly all of Ragnar's forces had already been deployed to defend Castle Harmon and the Central Highlands, because those battles looked like the main invasion. The clan simply didn't have enough manpower left to reinforce another front. That's when Theo finally revealed the real reason behind his request. If the army couldn't spare an entire division, then he would personally handle the operation himself. He requested independent command authority so he could lead a small hand-picked force to reinforce Bacchus territory, while simultaneously investigating the floating archipelago. If everything went according to plan, they'd not only secure an important strategic position, but also uncover and cripple the Trovan clan's financial lifeline. Julius couldn't help but admire the young man's vision. It wasn't just bold, it was incredibly well thought out. In the end, he approved Theo's request, but warned him not to overextend himself. As Theo walked out of headquarters, Julius quietly reflected on everything he had just heard. Somehow, Theo had gathered intelligence that even high-ranking officers barely knew existed. More importantly, instead of handing the information over to the Black Dragon and Black Snow, Theo had come directly to him. Julius immediately understood why. Theo wanted this mission kept completely off the books. Asking for permission had merely been a formality because, judging from the situation, the young lord had already started moving long before stepping into headquarters. Julius' suspicion turned out to be completely correct. While everyone believed Bacchus territory was poorly defended, Theo had secretly stationed his own people there days earlier. For weeks, Sybildria, Oddnurin, and the rest of Theo's biggest fanboys had been acting like useless drunkards. Every night, they purposely got wasted in public, stumbled through the streets, and slept during guard duty. The local soldiers thought Ragnar had sent them as a joke. In reality, it was all part of Theo's plan. The bottles they constantly carried weren't even filled with alcohol, they contained orange juice. The act was designed to lure enemy spies into believing Bacchus territory was completely defenseless, and sure enough, the Trojan operatives took the bait. As soon as the assassins infiltrated the walls under the cover of darkness, Sybil instantly dropped the drunken act. Before the hooded assassin standing over him could react, Sybil drew his sword and cut him down in a single clean strike. When the bottle flew into the air and spilled orange juice instead of liquor, The stunned operative finally realized he'd been fooled from the very beginning. Cybele didn't even drink. After pretending to be a lazy drunk for days, he was finally free to fight seriously. The rest of Theo's squad followed suit, effortlessly wiping out the enemy vanguard. Their first real mission since the blooming ceremony had become an all-out battle against Trojan infiltrators. With the first wave eliminated, Cybele ordered his men to light the emergency beacon, so the entire fortress would know the attack had begun. Just as he was about to ignite the signal, one of the assassins he had supposedly killed suddenly sprang back to life after playing dead the entire time. Catching everyone off guard, the operative lunged straight at Cybele, who had no time to react. Before the hidden attack could land, a sword flashed across the battlefield, instantly decapitating the assassin. The man who saved them was none other than Navin Bacchus himself, calmly wiping the blood from his blade. Navin scolded the boys for lowering their guard. If anything had happened to them, how could he possibly answer to Lord Theo? Embarrassed, Cybele immediately straightened up and apologized to the new head of the Bacchus family. Navin simply laughed it off and told everyone to relax, but only after finishing Theo's orders. With renewed confidence, Cybele lit the beacon while Navin watched from the highest point of the castle. Exactly as Theo had predicted, enemies came crawling toward Bacchus under the cover of darkness. Even Navin couldn't help wondering how Theo had managed to read the Trovan clan's plans with such terrifying accuracy. Once the beacon illuminated the battlefield, hidden crossbowmen lined the castle walls and unleashed a rain of arrows onto the exposed invaders below. The assault turned into a complete massacre. By the time Theo finally arrived, riding Umbra, his shadow wyvern, the battle was already well underway. Instead of jumping straight into the fight, he smiled as he watched his subordinates carrying out the operation exactly as planned. When dawn finally broke, the battlefield outside Bacchus Castle was completely covered with the bodies of defeated Trovan operatives. The mission had been an overwhelming success. Cybele proudly reported that the territory had been defended exactly as Lord Theo ordered. Theo couldn't help noticing that Cybele sounded even louder than usual, probably because this was the first time he'd ever led his own men through an actual battlefield. Theo praised the squad for their outstanding work, and hearing those words alone nearly brought Cybele to tears. The rest of the squad looked unbelievably jealous that their captain had received personal praise from Theo. Even Navin admitted he had underestimated the young inspectors. At first, he thought they were inexperienced rookies with little combat experience. But when the situation became critical, every single one of them stepped up. Their techniques still needed polishing, but they had proven themselves trustworthy and dependable. Hearing someone like Navin praise his followers made Theo feel like a proud older brother. Since Navin had grown fond of the squad, Theo proposed allowing them to become the foundation of the Bacchus family's new Knight Order. If the Ghost Sort personally trained them, Cybele and the others could grow into an elite force while also rebuilding the fallen household. Navin genuinely liked the idea, admitting it had been a long time since he had felt excited about the future. Satisfied that his men had found a place where they could grow together while advancing his own plans, Theo decided his work in Bacchus territory was finished. After saying his goodbyes, he mounted Umber once again and departed for his next objective, the mysterious floating archipelago. Even Navin, who thought he was already used to Theo's unpredictable nature, couldn't help shaking his head. The archipelago was infamous for rejecting outsiders, and almost nobody could enter it freely. But if anyone had a way to pull off the impossible, it was Theo. After several days of smooth sailing, Theo finally arrived at the bustling port city of Devon. Pulling his hood over his head to avoid attracting attention, he headed straight for a local pub, but the moment he stepped inside, trouble found him. A man nearly twice his size deliberately shoulder-checked him, clearly looking for a fight. Theo didn't lose his cool for even a second. Instead, he fired back with a sarcastic insult before casually grabbing a nearby pint of beer and smashing it across the brude's head. The entire tavern instantly exploded with cheers as people gathered around, eager to watch another bar fight. Judging by how none of the staff even bothered to stop serving drinks, this kind of chaos was just another normal day in Dion. Hidden behind the noisy pub, however, was a well-kept office, where the owner of the establishment was discussing a far more serious matter. Antonio Spinola, the next patriarch of the Spinola family, listened in frustration as one of his subordinates reported yet another demand from the Troivan clan. Before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Apai grow naturally. They were being forced to regularly supply gunpowder and steel as rental payments for the dragon's land sword. The wording made it sound like a business arrangement, but Antonio knew it was nothing more than blackmail. The Troivens had stolen the legendary sword, then shamelessly demanded resources from its rightful owners in exchange for temporarily borrowing it back. As humiliating as it was, Antonio had no choice but to comply. Without the dragon's land sword, the floating archipelago itself would eventually collapse into the sea. The burden of his people's survival weighed heavily on him, making him wonder if there was any hope left for the islands. Just then, the loud brawl outside interrupted the meeting. Already irritated by the Troivens' threats, Antonio kicked open his office door and stormed into the tavern, telling everyone to either drink quietly or get out. Standing beneath his hood, Theo couldn't help smirking, causing that fight had been part of his plan all along. He needed Antonio to leave his office, and the bait worked perfectly. Antonio Spinola was the exact person Theo had come to meet because the future of the floating archipelago depended on him. After the tavern staff dragged Theo downstairs into the liquor storage for starting trouble, he finally got straight to the point. He wanted passage to the floating archipelago and offered to serve aboard Antonio's ship as a combatant. Theo pointed out that sea monsters had been attacking vessels more frequently, while the Spinola family was currently short on manpower. From his perspective, it was a win-win arrangement. Antonio admitted the logic wasn't wrong, but he still rejected the offer without hesitation. Theo's story had too many holes. For someone claiming to be a wandering mercenary, his equipment was suspiciously clean and showed almost no signs of wear. He had conveniently started a fight right before asking to board a ship that almost nobody should know was departing soon. Antonio wasn't about to let an unknown variable onto one of his most important voyages. Rather than getting upset, Theo laughed. He would have been disappointed if Antonio had actually fallen for such an obvious lie. Now that he knew the man wasn't a fool, they could finally have a serious conversation. Sliding a single coin across the table, Theo casually mentioned the Black Skull Resistance, the underground force fighting to liberate the floating archipelago from Troiven control. He revealed that he had specifically traveled to Diane to negotiate with its leader, Antonio Spinola himself. Antonio immediately became cautious. This mysterious young man somehow knew secrets that should have been impossible for an outsider to uncover. Theo then casually brought up the dragon-slaying sword, causing Antonio to instantly accuse him of working for the Troivens. Theo simply chuckled and advised Antonio to stay calm instead of jumping to conclusions. The businessman quickly composed himself and dismissed his guards after they rushed in to investigate the commotion. Theo then dropped an even bigger bombshell. He hinted that the dragon-slaying sword wasn't actually in Troiven hands, but in his own possession. Antonio immediately called the claim absurd. The Troivens had insisted they controlled the sword. Theo calmly pointed out one flaw in that assumption. Had anyone actually seen it? Thinking back, Antonio realized the Troivens had never once presented the sword as proof. They had simply claimed to possess it, and everyone accepted their word because the fate of the archipelago left them too desperate to question it. Realizing his judgment had become clouded, Antonio finally sat down and agreed to hear Theo out. Theo then explained the true history behind the floating archipelago. According to legend, the ancient hero Krimbil defeated the sea dragon by driving the dragon-slaying sword into its head, sealing the monster beneath the ocean. Most people dismissed the story as nothing more than folklore, but Antonio knew it was actually historical fact. The common belief was that mysterious natural currents kept the islands suspended above the sea. In reality, those currents were generated by the sealed sea dragon itself. The dragon-slaying sword acted as the medium that stabilized the seal and regulated the massive flow of mana rising from beneath the islands. Ever since the sword disappeared, that balance had slowly begun collapsing. If the blade wasn't returned, the seal would eventually fail, causing the floating archipelago to sink into the ocean, along with everyone living there. Knowing the lives of his people were hanging by a thread, Antonio admitted that if Theo truly possessed the dragon-slaying sword, he'd gladly grant him anything in exchange for its return. Theo, however, wasn't interested in a simple trade. Returning the sword alone wouldn't solve anything, because the Troivens would simply steal it again later. Besides, Theo had no intention of giving up such a valuable source of power. Thankfully, he had already devised a solution that would both protect the archipelago and allow him to keep the sword. For now, all he needed was transportation to the floating archipelago, with no better options left. Antonio finally accepted the proposal and welcomed Theo aboard his ship. And naturally, during the voyage, Theo couldn't resist doing a little aura farming on everyone aboard the vessel, while quietly setting the next phase of his plan into motion. From the port city of Diane, the voyage to the floating archipelago went by without any trouble. From a distance, the islands looked like an ordinary port city, peacefully floating above the sea. In reality, the archipelago was a unique merchant federation with its own culture, history, and traditions, so influential that even the emperor recognized its autonomy. Theo, however, knew what the future held. In his previous life, the Great War had turned this thriving homeland into a nightmare. After the Troiven clan conquered it, its culture was erased. Its people were reduced to laborers producing war supplies, and by the end of the war, the entire floating archipelago sank beneath the ocean, disappearing from history altogether. That future was exactly why Theo had come here. He wasn't just fighting for Ragnar anymore. He was determined to save everyone living on these islands. Antonio wanted to believe him, but trust didn't come easily. Theo's plan sounded completely insane, especially the part where he casually claimed he intended to move the entire archipelago. Theo confidently assured him it was possible, because the sea dragon sealed beneath the islands was actually another guardian protecting an ancient dragon relic. Before leaving Ragnar, Theo had consulted the guardians of his own relics about the dragon's lying sword. They immediately confirmed that Bamung was indeed an ancient dragon relic, but they couldn't explain why it violently rejected every Ragnar who touched it. Theo couldn't even hold the sword without suffering intense pain. One of the guardians eventually revealed the missing piece. The guardian spirit originally assigned to Bamung had abandoned its relic long ago. That wasn't entirely unheard of either. Griffin himself had once attempted the same thing, but failed. Curious, Theo asked whether guardians could normally escape their relics. The answer was simple: only that person possessed the ability to let them survive. After leaving, ordinary guardians couldn't accomplish such a feat. Learning that the sea dragon had abandoned Bamung sparked an ambitious idea inside Theo's mind. Even after leaving the relic, the dragon still possessed enough leftover mana to keep an entire floating continent suspended above the ocean. If he could somehow subdue and reseal that guardian himself, he wouldn't just save the floating archipelago, he would gain the power to move the landmass wherever he pleased. The theory made perfect sense. Although the guardians warned him, the task would be unimaginably difficult. Even weakened, the sea dragon remained one of the strongest guardian beings in existence. Griffin even mocked Theo, pointing out that he didn't have any way of reaching the bottom of the sea where the dragon rested. Theo simply smiled. He had already planned everything. He knew how to descend to the ocean floor, how to locate the dragon, and even how to reseal it afterward. According to his plan, everything revolved around the gigantic Kriemhild statue standing on one of the islands. Hidden inside that monument was a power even the natives had forgotten about. Although Theo had already shown Antonio the genuine dragon's laying sword, the businessman still struggled to believe such an absurd strategy could actually work. Theo couldn't blame him. The fate of the entire archipelago rested on whether this gamble succeeded. Right on cue, Theo's system issued a new subquest. He was ordered to return Bamung to its rightful place, locate the guardian, subdue it, and prove himself worthy of becoming the relic's new master. By nightfall, Antonio's ship finally docked at one of the archipelago's ports. Under his command, the members of the Black Skull Resistance gathered to receive their orders. Their mission was simple: escort Theo to the Kriemhild statue through the organization's secret infiltration route, then stay out of his way while he completed the rest alone. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Apai grow naturally. Since every major family on the islands had already been bought by the Troivens, security around the statue had become tighter than ever. Fortunately, Black Skull possessed hidden tunnels that bypassed the heavily guarded entrances. Before setting off, Antonio wished Theo luck. While Theo quietly examined the resistance members gathered before him, almost immediately, he noticed one face that didn't quite belong. Still, he kept the suspicion to himself. Just as expected, the Kriemhild statue was surrounded by guards from every direction, but thanks to the underground route, Theo and the resistance slipped through unnoticed. Guided through a tunnel hidden behind a roaring waterfall, they arrived near the monument in almost complete silence. The crashing water conveniently drowned out every sound they made. Standing before the statue, Theo pulled Balmung out of his subspace, immediately feeling the familiar burning rejection spread across his hand. After thanking the Black Skull agents for bringing him this far, he told them he'd continue alone. Watching him casually summon the legendary dragon-slaying sword out of thin air left every revolutionary staring in complete disbelief. The closer Theo approached the statue, the stronger Balmung's rejection became. With incredible agility, he climbed the massive stone sculpture by following the carved body of the sea drag and wrapped around it until he finally reached Kriemhild's figure at the very top. As Theo climbed higher, the Black Skull agents watched in amazement, unable to believe the legendary blade they had spent years searching for had somehow ended up in the hands of a complete stranger. For the first time in a long while, many of them genuinely believed there was hope for the floating archipelago again. Unfortunately, the one suspicious member Theo had noticed earlier finally made his move. Without warning, the infiltrator turned on the resistance members beside him and butchered them one after another. Black Skull had already been infiltrated by Troyavan spies. Now that Balmung had appeared, there was no reason to maintain the disguise any longer. Meanwhile, Theo finally reached the top of the monument, where Kriemhild statue stood triumphantly over the sea dragon's head. Unsure how to activate the relic, he attempted to recreate the ancient legend by driving Balmung into the statue exactly as Kriemhild supposedly had. Nothing happened. While drinking a potion to soothe the burns covering his hand, Theo carefully reconsidered the system's quest instructions, trying to figure out what he had overlooked. Before he could reach an answer, the hidden spies launched a surprise attack. Unfortunately for them, Theo's senses were far too sharp to fall for something so obvious. Their leader, Gray, was caught completely off guard when Theo effortlessly avoided the ambush and punished him with a brutal kick to the stomach. Staggering backward with internal injuries, Gray immediately realized they had underestimated their target. Looking around, he noticed Balmung had suddenly disappeared from Theo's hand, leaving him even more confused. His hesitation nearly got him killed. The remaining spies quickly regrouped around their leader, but Gray urgently warned them not to recklessly challenge Theo, unless they wanted to die in a single strike. At that exact moment, the guard stationed outside heard a deafening crash coming from the monument. Looking up in horror, they watched the legendary Kriemhild statue, an ancient landmark that had stood for countless generations, begin violently crumbling into pieces before their very eyes. Far away from the Kriemhild statue, Antonio and the remaining Black Skull members anxiously waited for news from the infiltration team. Minutes felt like hours until one survivor finally stumbled out of the secret tunnel. She was heavily wounded, exhausted, and barely able to stand. Between breaths, she revealed the horrifying truth. Gray and the men fighting alongside them had been Troyavan spies all along. The traitor suddenly turned on the resistance, slaughtering almost everyone before she barely managed to escape. Antonio immediately realized the severity of his mistake. The enemy had infiltrated Black Skull right under his nose, and he never noticed. Meanwhile, atop the massive sea dragon statue, Theo was still locked in battle against Gray and the other spies. None of them individually posed much of a threat, but they fought with incredible discipline. Even when Theo intentionally left openings, they refused to recklessly attack. Instead, they focused entirely on delaying him. Theo quickly figured out why. They were obviously buying time until reinforcements from the nearby 3rd District arrived. Since they refused to fall for his bait, Theo decided to force the situation himself. He unleashed a relentless barrage of attacks, not only targeting the spies, but also tearing chunks off the ancient stone statue beneath them. Blow after blow chipped away at the monument until something unexpected appeared. Hidden beneath the stone was an ancient metallic box, with a hollow slot perfectly shaped to fit a sword. The moment Gray saw it, he immediately screamed for his men to stop Theo, no matter the cost. Theo couldn't help laughing at himself. He had been overthinking the entire quest. The system had literally told him to return Balmung to its rightful place. All he had to do was trust the sword and follow where it led. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the exposed mechanism. Gray desperately threw his own body forward to block him, but Theo was simply too fast. Before anyone could stop him, he drove Balmond straight into the hollow slot. The instant the blade locked into place, the entire monument erupted with blinding light. A massive shockwave exploded outward, violently blasting Gray and every trove and spy away from the statue. Theo gritted his teeth as Balmond's painful rejection surged through his body, yet he refused to let go of the sword. Outside, the explosion finally alerted the guard stationed around the historical site. Looking up, they watched in complete disbelief as the centuries-old Kremhilt statue began collapsing before their very eyes. The monument they had sworn to protect crumbled into ruins as the overwhelming power swallowed Theo whole. The impact knocked him unconscious, and when he finally opened his eyes, again he found himself somewhere completely unfamiliar. His head felt like it was splitting apart, but the unbearable pain at least confirmed one thing: he was still alive. Looking around, he immediately concluded that he had somehow been transported into Balmond's relic dungeon. Unlike every other relic dungeon he had entered before, this place wasn't filled with ruins, or instead endless forests of towering green trees stretched as far as the eye could see. While Theo tried to gather information, 4 tiny voices suddenly called out beside him. His 4 guardian spirits had manifested into adorable chibi versions of themselves using Theo's mana as temporary physical bodies because his mana reserves were still too small. Maintaining even these miniature forms required considerable effort. The fairy dragon immediately commented that the entire dungeon was overflowing with lingering emotions, deep longing, regret, and pity directed toward a single human. Theo instantly suspected that person was the legendary hero Kremhilt. Although the Guardians admitted they couldn't be certain, they could only sense the emotional remnants left behind by the previous Guardian. Since the relic's original Guardian had abandoned this place long ago, everyone assumed they could calmly explore the dungeon. That assumption lasted only a few seconds. Without anyone noticing, a skeletal archer had already taken aim. An arrow shot through the forest like lightning before exploding with incredible force. Theo's instincts activated instantly. At that last possible moment, he tilted his head aside and casually caught the arrow in midair. It was immediately obvious that the Guardian's assumptions had been wrong. The dungeon wasn't abandoned at all. One skeleton quickly became dozens as undead warriors emerged from every direction, surrounding the only living person in the entire forest. Every single one of them viewed Theo as an intruder who had to be eliminated. While charging into battle, the skeletons repeatedly chanted Kremhilt's name with almost religious reverence. Griffin quickly realized what had happened. The dungeon's original guardian must have created these undead warriors, Dragonfangs, to forever protect Kremhilt's ownership of the relic. More explosive arrows rained from above, nearly striking the tiny Griffin himself. Theo effortlessly deflected them, redirecting one arrow into a nearby skeleton and crushing its skull. After exchanging several blows, Theo quickly judged the battlefield. Individually, the Dragonfangs weren't especially dangerous, but they're overwhelmed. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Apai. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.